It's 6 million years ago. You're sitting by a tree, absolutely starving. There are no farms, no stores, no restaurants. But right in front of you, crawling up that tree, is a colony of fat, juicy termites. And without a second thought, you eat them. All of them. Because bugs weren't disgusting to ancient humans. They were breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Here is something that will completely change how you think about your ancestors. Scientists now believe that insects made up almost half of the daily diet of early humans millions of years ago. Not occasionally, not as a survival snack, daily. Every single day. Bugs were not a last resort. They were the main course.
And here's what makes this even more fascinating. This is an ancient history for everyone. Right now, today, over 2 billion people around the world eat insects as a regular part of their diet. More than 2,000 species of insects are considered edible. The people who eat bugs aren't doing something weird. They're doing something our ancestors did for millions of years. To understand why ancient humans ate bugs, we need to go way back. Not thousands of years, millions. 6 million years ago, our last common ancestor with chimpanzees was a small, furry creature living in the forests of Africa. And just like chimpanzees today, they ate insects constantly. Not because they had to, because bugs are incredibly good food.
Watch chimpanzees today, and you'll see exactly what our ancient ancestors did. They find a termite mound, they pick a long, thin stick, they push it inside the mound, and wait. The termites climb onto the stick, and the chimp pulls it out and licks them all off. Scientists call this tool use, but the chimps call it lunch. But why termites? Because termites are nutritional powerhouses. A single serving of termites contains up to 38% protein. They're packed with iron, calcium, and zinc. They're high in healthy fats. For an early human whose diet was mostly fruit and leaves, termites were like finding a vitamin supplement factory growing out of the ground.
How do we actually know ancient humans ate bugs? The evidence comes from one of archaeology's least glamorous fields, the study of ancient human waste. Fossilized feces, called coprolites, found in caves across the USA and Mexico, contain insect remains, wings, legs, shells, ants, beetle larvae, lice, ticks. Ancient humans weren't just occasionally eating bugs, they were eating them so regularly that their waste was full of insect parts. 2 million years after our first ancestors, a more advanced human relative appeared, the Australopithecines. They could walk upright, they could make simple tools, and according to archaeological evidence, insects remained a critical part of their diet, especially termites. Researchers believe they used sharpened sticks to dig into termite mounds, just like chimps do today. The tools changed, the menu didn't.
Here's the challenge early humans faced. Their diet was mostly fruit, seeds, and leaves. Nutritious, but low in protein. And protein is critical for building muscles and, most importantly, growing a bigger brain. Before early humans learned to hunt large animals, which took millions of years to master, bugs were their primary protein source. Without insects, human brains may never have grown large enough to develop complex thought. This is the most mind-bending part of the entire story. Some evolutionary scientists believe that the protein and nutrients from insects, particularly termites and beetle larvae, provided the fuel for early human brain development. The human brain is the most energy-hungry organ in existence, and bugs may have been what powered its growth. In a very literal sense, bugs help build the brain you're using right now to watch this video.
So what was actually on the prehistoric menu? Termites were the most popular, abundant, easy to find, and incredibly nutritious. Grasshoppers were next, easy to catch in large numbers and high in protein. Beetle larvae were a fatty, calorie-rich treat. Ants added flavor, literally, since they contain formic acid, which tastes sour. Moth caterpillars, locusts, and yes, even lice found in ancient human waste were apparently eaten. Catching bugs required real skill and strategy. Termites were extracted with sticks. Grasshoppers were chased across open fields, often by groups working together, driving them into enclosures or traps. Beetle larvae were found under rotting logs and in dead trees. Some insects were smoked out of their nests. Ancient humans knew exactly where every insect lived, what season they appeared in, and how to harvest them efficiently.
Ancient insect eating was deeply seasonal. In spring, ant eggs and larvae. In summer, locusts and grasshoppers, which swarmed in massive numbers. In autumn, moth caterpillars, fat from feeding all season. In winter, grubs and beetle larvae found underground or in dead wood. Ancient humans were insect experts. They tracked migration patterns, swarming seasons, and nesting locations just as carefully as they tracked large game animals. Fast forward to ancient civilizations. The Egyptians ate locusts massively and enthusiastically. When locust swarms descended on Egypt, which happened regularly, the Egyptians didn't just see a plague. They saw a protein bonanza. They roasted them, dried them, and stored them. Ancient Egyptian records describe locusts being eaten by both the poor and the wealthy. A locust swarm was terrible for crops, but it was a feast for the people. The Bible itself mentions insect eating. John the Baptist, one of the most famous figures in the Old Testament, lived in the desert and survived on locusts and wild honey. This wasn't seen as unusual or desperate. Eating locusts was completely normal and accepted in that culture. The Old Testament also explicitly lists which insects are permitted to eat. Beetles, grasshoppers, and locusts are all approved. The ancient world had no problem with bug eating. Here's one you probably didn't learn in school. Aristotle, one of the greatest minds in human history, was a passionate advocate for eating insects. He wrote entire sections of his famous work, Historia Animalum, about insects, including the best times to eat cicadas. He wrote that female cicadas were tastiest before mating season, and nymphs your best just before they shed their skin. Aristotle wasn't just... Romans were so fond of beetle larvae that they actually farmed them. They would collect beetle eggs, place the larvae in containers, and fatten them specifically on flour and wine, creating a richer, more luxurious flavor. This was deliberate insect agriculture. Thousands of years before anyone thought to farm chickens or cattle in controlled conditions, the Romans were already running larvae farms. Just let that sink in. In ancient Mesoamerica, the Aztecs built one of the most sophisticated insect-eating cultures in human history. Their markets sold chapulines, roasted grass. In ancient China, insect eating has been documented for over 3,000 years. A Tang Dynasty cookbook, written between 618 and 907 AD, outlined recipes using wasp larvae and pupae that had apparently been in Chinese cuisine for centuries before that. Silkworm pupae were eaten as a byproduct of silk production. Bee larvae were considered a delicacy, and certain insects were prescribed as medicine for treating various ailments. In Africa, where our species was born, insect eating never stopped. The annual termite swarm is still celebrated as a food event in many African cultures. When the rains come and termites take their mating flight, entire communities come out to harvest them. The termites are collected by the bucketful, pan-roasted with a little salt, and eaten immediately, or dried and stored for later. They taste, apparently, like popcorn. Here's why insects were such a perfect food. Gram for gram, crickets contain as much protein as beef. They have more iron than spinach, more calcium than milk, more B12 than salmon, and they contain all 9 essential amino acids. They are, nutritionally speaking, almost a perfect food. Ancient humans weren't eating bugs because they had nothing better. They were eating the best possible food available to them.
There's another dimension to this story that makes it relevant right now in the 21st century. Producing 1 kilogram of beef requires 10 kilograms of feed and thousands of liters of water. Producing 1 kilogram of crickets
requires just 2 kilograms of feed and almost no water. Insects produce virtually no greenhouse gases. Ancient humans stumbled onto the most sustainable food source on Earth, and then we abandoned it. So, if bug eating was so universal and so nutritious, why did Western culture stop? This is one of the most interesting questions in food history, and the answer is complicated. It involves religion, wealth, geography, and psychology. Let's break it down. As agriculture advanced and meat became more available, a status shift happened. Eating large animals, cattle, pigs, sheep, required land, resources, and wealth. Bugs were free for anyone to catch. So over time, in cultures where meat was available, eating meat became a sign of wealth, and eating bugs became associated with poverty. It wasn't that bugs got worse, it was that other foods became status symbols.
Geography played a huge role. In Europe, the climate meant that insects were seasonal, small, and relatively scarce for much of the year. Meanwhile, in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, where insects are large, abundant year-round, and incredibly easy to harvest, insect eating naturally continued. The people who stopped eating bugs largely did so because they had access to alternatives. Everyone else kept going. And then there's psychology. American psychologist Paul Rosen has spent decades studying why people find certain foods disgusting. His research found that disgust toward insects is almost entirely learned, not innate. Young children in cultures that eat bugs happily eat them. Young children in cultures that don't are taught that bugs are dirty and dangerous. The disgust isn't biological, it's cultural programming. We chose to find bugs gross. In ancient Rome, the shift began around the end of the 1st century BC. As the Roman Empire grew more powerful and agricultural production expanded massively, meat became increasingly available to more people. At the same time, Romans began associating insects more.
But in Mexico, the tradition never died. Chapulines, toasted grasshoppers seasoned with garlic, lime, and chili, are still sold in markets from Oaxaca to Mexico City. They're crunchy, savory, salty, and genuinely delicious by all accounts. They're eaten as snacks, added to tacos, and used as toppings. In Oaxaca, chapulines are as normal as chips and salsa are in the United States. In Thailand, fried insects are everywhere. Street vendors sell fried beetles, silkworms, grasshoppers, and even scorpions as casual snacks, right alongside pad thai and mango sticky rice. Tourists are often horrified. Locals are baffled by the horror. For millions of Thais, eating a fried grasshopper is no different from eating a prawn. It's just food. In Japan, a traditional dish called inago no tsukudani, grasshoppers simmered in soy sauce and sugar, has been eaten for centuries, particularly in rural inland regions where seafood was not available. The dish is sweet, savory, and crunchy. It was, and in some regions still is, considered a comfort food, something grandmothers make, a taste of home. The fact that it's
Here's the perspective that changes everything. For 6 million years of human and pre-human history, bugs were a normal food. The period of Western disgust toward insects is approximately 200 years old, maybe 300 at most. 200 years out of 6 million. That means the disgust we feel toward eating bugs today represents less than 0.003% of our species' history with insect food. The disgust is not ancient wisdom. It is a very recent cultural blip. In 2013, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization published a landmark report called Edible Insects: Future Prospects for Food and Feed Security. The report concluded that insect eating is nutritionally excellent, environmentally sustainable, and should be seriously considered as part of the global food system. The UN wasn't suggesting something radical. They were suggesting we return to something ancient. Right now, insect farming is one of the fastest growing industries in the world. Companies in the Netherlands, Canada, the United States, and across.
Cricket flour is already in protein bars, pasta, bread, and energy products on supermarket shelves in North America and Europe. Many people who would never eat a whole cricket are unknowingly consuming cricket powder in their food. And the evidence suggests
their bodies are doing just fine. Because our digestive systems were built for this. We ate bugs for 6 million years. Our guts still know what to do. High-end restaurants in Copenhagen, London, New York, and Tokyo are now serving insect dishes as prestigious menu items. Rene Redzepi's famous Noma restaurant in Copenhagen, repeatedly voted the world's best restaurant, has served live ants on dishes. What once signaled poverty now signals culinary sophistication. The ancient food has become avant-garde. The full circle is almost complete. Here's the conclusion that should make us all think carefully. The decision to stop eating insects in Western cultures was not based on
Here's the conclusion that should make us all think carefully. The decision to stop eating insects in Western cultures was not based on nutritional science. It was not based on safety research. It was not based on any objective analysis. It was based on status, culture, and psychological conditioning. We stopped eating one of the most nutritious, sustainable foods on Earth because it became unfashionable. That's it.
Around 3,000 ethnic groups worldwide continue to eat insects as a regular part of their diet. These communities didn't stop a tradition that stretches back 6 million years. They maintained a connection to food that is nutritionally superior, environmentally sustainable, and deeply tied to their cultural heritage. The question isn't why they still eat bugs. The question is why we ever stopped.
Here's why this ancient habit is suddenly urgent again. The global food system is one of the largest contributors to climate change. Livestock farming uses 70% of all agricultural land. It produces massive quantities of methane. It consumes enormous amounts of water. And as the global population heads toward 10 billion, we cannot sustain current meat consumption levels. Insects may not just be a food of the past. They may be a food of survival.
Ancient humans didn't need nutritional science journals to know bugs were good food. They had something better. Millions of years of instinct, observation, and shared knowledge. They knew which insects were safe, which were nutritious, which seasons they were most abundant, and which ones tasted best. This accumulated knowledge was passed from generation to generation for millions of years. And then, in a blink of evolutionary time, much of it.
Scientists and food futurists now believe that insect eating will return to mainstream culture within the next 20 to 30 years, but gradually in processed forms. Cricket flour and protein products, insect-based pet food, black soldier fly larvae used in aquaculture feed. The insects won't be whole and crunchy at first. They'll be hidden in familiar products until gradually the stigma fades and whole insects return to the table. Let's run the full timeline one last time. 6 million years ago, our primate ancestors eat insects daily. 2 million years ago, Australopithecines used tools to harvest termites. 3000 BC, ancient Egyptians and Chinese eat insects as staple foods. 350 BC, Aristotle writes insect recipes. There's something beautiful about this full circle. A prehistoric human sitting by a fire in Africa 6 million years ago, pulling termites off a stick. A modern person in a city today, picking up a cricket flour protein bar. They are doing the same thing, feeding a hungry human brain with the most efficient food nature ever created, separated by millions of years, connected by a tiny insect. The next time you swat a bug away from your food, pause for just a moment. That tiny creature is carrying a 6 million year relationship with humanity. It helped fuel our brains. It powered our evolution. It fed empires. It sustained billions. And somewhere deep in our ancient DNA, we still remember that it was good. And that is the full story